On to question 3. We are doing paper 4 version 1 from the 2021 series. Let's set up a new file. And this is an object-oriented question. A computer game requires users to travel around the world to find and open treasure chests. Each treasure chest has a mathematics question inside. Oh, the best kind of treasure. The user enters the answer. The number of points awarded depends on the number of attempts before the user gives us the correct answer. The program will be created using object-oriented programming. So this is where this file comes into play. What I expect we're going to need to do is read this data from the file and load it into various objects. The first object being this class treasure chest that has 3 parameters, which is question, which I guess is a string, and answer, which we can see is an integer, and points, which is also an integer, and then assigns them to some private properties within the class. So in Python, you need to use the double underscore to represent private, that a property is private, that it can't be accessed from outside of the scope of the object that it's declared in. And what we need to make sure we do is that we add our pseudocode comments as well. So private question is a string, and private answer is an integer because it's a maths quiz, and points is also an integer. So we're just declaring the class and writing the constructor. And that's it. So let's put that in our evidence document. Oh, let's just test to make sure it compiles so I've not made any typos. That's that. Okay, so that was part 3a. 3b, the text file treasurechest data.txt stores data for 5 questions in the order of question, answer, points. So what this means is this is a question, this is an answer, this is how many points, question, answer, points, question, answer, points, and so on. For example, well, I just gave you an example. Write program code for the procedure read data to, so it's asking us to code not a method. So they get confused. If they use the terminology function procedure in an object-oriented question, then they're asking you to do something outside of the scope of the object. So the procedure is called read data. And we need to open this file, don't we? So let's try to read treasurecchest.data.txt as file. So last time I did a question like this, I missed something out. Let's read at the end here. So use exception handling to output an appropriate message. So we need to make sure that if we try to open the file, but there's a file not found error, then that we need to accept that there might be a file not found error and do something instead, such as print cannot open the file error. Let's make sure that's in place. So once we've opened the file, if the program is able to get past this line, then the exception handling clause won't be needed. So then what we can go on to do is read each question, answer, and points from the file. Let's make a variable called like line, and or let's just loop through the lines in the file. Let's do it in a slightly Pythonic way. Let's say for line in file, and let's like do a count as well. I'm not going to use enumerate. So again, I'm not writing how I would normally write this code using like specific Python functions. Let's keep it limited to the kind of things that are covered on your A-level. Let's make a separate variable called count that's going to be an integer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to increment each time, and then I can make some decisions about whether the line that's being read is a question line or an answer line or a points line. And this is how I'm going to do that. I'm going to say if the count is if when we divide count by 3, it's equal to 0, there's no remainder. So when we mod count by 3, what this must mean is that this line is a question. But if when we mod by 3 it's equal to 1, what this must mean is the line is points, and we need to convert points into an integer. Otherwise, count mod 3 must be equal to 2, so that must mean that oops, sorry, wrong way around, that should have been answer. Otherwise, count mod 3 must be equal to 2, so the line must represent point value instead. And this is a nice way to do these kind of questions where you're given, for some reason, 3 kind of object properties or a number of object properties on different lines in a file. So this is us reading each one, and what we need to do is we need to create an object using those parameters, because the parameters get passed in when the object is instantiated. So let's make a new treasure chest. Let's pass in the question and the answer and the points. And I need to declare an array of array treasures. So let's declare my array called array treasure, which is an array of how many? Or 5 questions of treasure chest. So in Python, because this object requires parameter values, it's not possible to instantiate the objects inside the array. So this I'm going to use null values for, which I think is fine. This is the Python equivalent of declaring a fixed size list containing objects. And then all I need to do is make sure that every time I make a new object, I'm going to write it to a certain index in the array. So every time I make my object, I need to write it to an index. So this means I'll also need an index variable, which will go up by 1 each time. So what are some alternatives here? I could just set up a loop to loop index 5 times, and then I could just call readline 3 times instead. So let me perhaps show you 2 variations of the same procedure, and then you can decide which one you want to go for. So let's do another alternative. Another alternative is that I could use an empty list, because we have seen evidence of this in the mark schemes. Let's put in an empty list, and instead let's just use the append function, because it does state at the top of the paper, it says lists can be used instead of arrays. Something like a list is an alternative to an array. So what that means is we can actually change the size of the array using append. That's what we can assume, right? The other thing I want to show you is, okay, let's do it a different way. Let's just say for index in range 5, because we know there's 15 lines in the file. That means there's 15 treasure chest objects that need to be created. So instead, I can just use readline each time. So let's say question comes from the file readline, as does the answer value comes from the file readline, and the points value comes from calling file.readline. However, we do need to make sure that we convert the answer and the points into integers. And that kind of maybe removes that complexity of using modulo and understanding what that does. That also means that we don't actually need this count variable. And maybe that is a simpler, more concise solution. So you can decide which approach you would like. Let me just test that both of those work. So I'm going to call from my main method down here, if name is equal to main. Let's call my read data. Let's call my read data 2. Let's see that let's just check that neither of them cause the program to crash. Well, I don't have a variable called answer. That's inside read data. Interesting. So I only need to make my array. I only need to create something in my array once I've reached the third value. Let's try that again. Okay, so both subroutines seem to work now. I think I maybe actually like this one. Maybe this is a bit more concise than using the modulo approach. Let's see what's next. So let's put in this one, evidence. Start part 3b and part 3c1. The main program repeats each question until the user inputs the correct answer. So so we need to, first of all, extend the class. So we've got a get question method, def get question, because it's a method, itself needs to be the parameter. What will it return? Well, it's going to return the value of the private property question, which is a string. Class TreasureChest has a method check answer. Let's implement check answer, def check answer that takes the user's answer as a parameter, user answer, which is going to be an integer, and then it returns a Boolean value of true or false. And when does it do that? Well, we can just return the user's answer if it's equal to the private property answer. So let's just return the result of the logical expression directly. That's how you can implement like a checking functionality. Let's put that in. Part 3c3. The class TreasureChest has a method getPoints. Ooh, hold on, we've made a mistake. I missed out self there. Let's put that back in. Class TreasureChest has a method getPoints that takes the number of attempts as a parameter. If the number of attempts is 1, it returns the value of points. If attempt equals 1, let's return the value of points. If the number of attempts is 2, return the value of self.points floor divided by 2. If it's 3 or 4, if attempts is 3 or attempts is 4, we need to return the value of self.points divided by 4. Otherwise, we return 0. So that's the code for the method getPoints. Let's put that in the answer document. Let's have a look at doing 3C4. Write program code for the main program to call the procedure read data. Ask the user to enter a question number between 1 and 5. So let's just do a little flag. Valid is false and while not valid. Question number is input. Enter a question number between 1 and 5. And let's validate it. So let's say only if they enter question number that's made up of digits, and only if, well, what we can then do is convert the question number, cast the question number into an integer. Only if we can do that, then we can start to say, okay, if the question number is bigger than 0 and the question number is less than 6, then valid can be true. And we can just continue, we can just iterate back round to the next loop Otherwise, we can print a message and say question number was invalid. So sometimes you get marks for the validation. So let's just make sure that that's in there. Output the question that matches the question number entered by the user. So question numbers, I assume, are the indices in the array. So let's output the question. Let's say inside the array of questions, where is my array of questions? Okay, let's just see what they were asked here. So read data as a procedure, even though it's declaring and creating an array. So if we create an array here, do they want the array to be global, or do they want us to actually not make a procedure? And do they want us to make a function, do you think? So this won't work if we now try to access array data outside of this scope. Let me prove this to you. So if I try to now say, okay, print array treasure, which is the name of the array, and I want to say at the question number, and I want to get the question. This code will not execute because the problem is that array treasure is not defined inside the main program scope. So this is where Cambridge kind of falls down. Sometimes they mix up their requirements. What are they asking us to do? They're asking us to make a procedure that creates an array. Should the array be global? You might think so, but oftentimes they say procedure, but they actually mean function in terms of Python. And the reason for this is because if it was an array that is, I mean, it doesn't specify this, but if it was passed in by reference, then we wouldn't need to update it. So maybe let's do that. Let's pass in a reference to array treasure. Let's just make a note here that that's going to be by ref. Now when we call array treasure, if we have array treasure declared outside of the global scope here and we pass it in, then it will actually update in Python. Because lists are mutable, we should be able to pass it in, update the values, and then it should work. Or maybe not, because we're not actually mutating the values. List index out of range. Let's try that again. No, that didn't work. All right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this a function. I'm going to make an executive decision to use a function instead of a procedure, because otherwise we have no way to get the. And this is what I think you should do in this circumstance. So we're changing it into a function, and we're going to say change. We're going to add a comment. Had to change read data into a function. You told us to create the array inside the procedure, but without returning it, it cannot be accessed inside main program scope. So they make some mistakes. So let's just make it explicit. Why are we changing or seemingly changing the requirements? Because what you've told us to do doesn't work. And then let's make sure that we return the value of array treasure at the end. So we've modified it so read data now returns the array. And what this should mean is that we can take the user's question number -1 because Python uses zero-based indexing. And now that should allow us to get the question out. So we can see the question. Let's maybe make this a little bit nicer. Let's just say Let's make a variable called question. And then we can print some context. We can say, what is question, and a question mark, and then that makes it look a bit nicer. What is 2 times 2? Notice that we're getting a new line there. So what I would suggest you do is you always do line.strip each time, just to remove the new line when you're reading from a file, because that could cause problems. So let's just update our answer for this one with our commentaries about why it has to be a function, not a procedure. And let's carry on with the questions. Look, we needed to check if the user answered. So let's get the user's answer. And let's use the check answer. We need to say, okay, at this question, let's run check answer. And let's pass in the user's answer. And we can say, if that is true, we need to repeat until the user gets the correct answer. So let's say correct answer is false. While not correct answer, we need to, well, we don't need to get the question inside the loop. Let's get the question. Let's loop until they get the correct answer. Let's print out the question. Let's get their answer. Let's check if the answer is correct. And if their answer is correct, then that means correct answer is true. Let's set attempts to 0, and every time they take an attempt, let's add 1. We need to count how many times the user attempted the question. That's what we just did. Then we need to use the method getPoints to return the number of points awarded. And then, so the points awarded will be from using getPoints and .getPoints. And to run getPoints, we needed to pass in the number of attempts. So let's pass in the number of attempts. And then we can print a message. You scored, points. So let's see if that works. Let's run the program. And we want to select question 1 and answer it correctly. What is 2 times 2? 4. You scored 10 points. Is that the correct amount of points? Well, the first question was worth 10 points. And because we got it correct in 1 attempt, it should just return the points without dividing it. So that works. Now what we need to do is a second test where we choose question 5, and we need to give a bogus answer the first time, and then we need to give the correct answer the second time, 7,000, and then in that case we got 9 points. So let's just check that. So for question 5, we should have got half points because it took 2 attempts, and half of 18 is 9. So we need screenshots as evidence for that one. In the answer document. And then let's finally just put our code in for the main method. So quite a challenging OOP question, this one. There's lots to consider. Yeah, it's possible that the validation, if you're not asked to do validation, it might not be needed, but it's always good to kind of put it in, especially towards the end of the exam if you've got some time left. So I hope that helped. That was the OOP question.